extraordinary feeling and quite unlike any feeling that a painter has ever had, I think, to be able to stretch and pull his image around like this and fit it into a new perspective.
Richard Hamilton is one of our most important painters of this century. He's 70 years old now, but he's using the very latest computer graphics equipment to create, for QED, a painting that will be a picture of the 1990s. 40 years ago, Richard helped to define pop culture, and he's been a part of pop himself. At the request of the Beatles, he created the cover art for their White Album. To produce 5,000 prints for QED viewers, he's using the latest technology. Richard Hamilton was born at a time when it was impossible to ignore technology.
My father just loved cars, and so he always had a Banger of his own that he bought for £5, but it meant that he was working on it all the time. And so I was always sitting by him, watching him do these rather odd things, not without any great understanding, but obviously I must have been interested.
The family lived in Victoria, a short tube ride from the Science Museum.
As a child, I spent many Saturday mornings pressing buttons to see pistons sliding backwards and forwards. And it seemed almost to be part of the game. You had to press all the buttons if you had succeeded in a Saturday morning's work.
I went to elementary school and I didn't feel that I was any good at anything. And I did like to draw, but that wasn't something that was a subject in the school, but I spent a lot of time drawing. I even made a picture which I sent to the Royal Academy, saying age 10. It came back in the normal way.
But Richard didn't give up. At the age of 12, he was encouraged by a teacher to follow adult art classes, and for 2 years he attended evening classes as well as school. But in spite of his determination to study art, his education had to stop.
I left the elementary school when I was 14. I might have gone to a secondary school, but my parents decided I couldn't afford the uniform, so I didn't go to the grammar school.
Still, he continued with his evening classes, and at the age of 16, he was good enough to enter the Royal Academy School.
It was a very grand institution, and I remember being very aware of the fact that the fire buckets had a royal crest on them. There were these red fire buckets filled with sand, usually with a cigarette stubbed out in it. And there's this royal crest on the bucket. And I thought that this was really grand.
But Richard was only there 2 years. Then art education came to a sudden stop. In 1939, the main demand for painters was to camouflage the factories. Too young for the army, Richard was given a technical job.
My real involvement with technology came during the war, when they decided that I would become a draftsman, simply because I said that I'd been to an art school and could use a pencil.
Working in the electronics industry, his job was to do technical drawings. It was skilled work. His drawings were for tools which built radio and radar sets for the forces. And he learnt things he never even thought about before.
I had to learn something about numbers. It had never occurred to me that there was anything interesting about using numbers to add up and calculate and so on. And I had to literally learn what a decimal point was. I didn't know. And so I managed to get through the war doing something which I never felt at all fitted for before.
At the war's end, Richard returned to the art world. He was a leading member of a group of young artists who met regularly to discuss all aspects of modern life at the Institute of Contemporary Arts, the ICA.
There was the great influx of American popular culture with Elvis Presley, Bill Haley, and these were being discussed at the ICA before they were even played on radio.
Here's Judy.
And it was the start of commercial television, too.
Jude is pretty and Jude is good, but little Judy never could resist the chocks in Dairy Box, those lovely centres in Dairy Box.
In 1956, the group put on an exhibition called This Is Tomorrow. Richard's contribution turned out to be one of the most important pictures in Britain since the war.
My whole interest in this particular presentation in the exhibition was that this is the world as it exists, the world of the jukebox, the cinema, of science fiction. And as a preliminary, I made a list. Simply took my pen and took a piece of paper and I said, now, what is significant in the life that we now lead? And I said, well, what's important is that man and woman exist. So I started with man, woman, and then moved on to cinema, domestic appliances, cars, food. And then I found examples of each of these listings. In the case of the man, you can put through the magazines, it's full of men, it's full of women. But each one, you think, is this a symbol that represents man? And it wasn't until I hit on this muscle man, stripped off, I thought, that is the symbolic man of our time. And similarly, I found a picture of a girl who was sitting down that I could put in a chair, also stripped off. The relationship, I mean, when you think of man and woman, it's Adam and Eve. So whatever relationship you think of as Adam and Eve having, that was what I felt about them. Yes, they were a couple. That collage is of tremendous importance to me. However significant it may be to anybody else, it was a turning point in my life.
In that picture, Richard Hamilton had signalled the coming together of art and pop. Later, Richard's connection between art and pop became taken for granted. Young artists, featured here in Ken Russell's film, used the images of fairgrounds, pinball machines, and cutouts from magazines to make pop art. In 1967, one of them, Peter Blake, took pop art to a mass audience when he made the cover for the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album. To follow Sgt. Pepper, the group approached the father of pop art.
Well, Paul McCartney asked me to do the cover for an album that they were about to produce, and I thought that it would be nice to have nothing on the cover. And because I had to do something, make some contribution, I made a collage made from a collection of very personal material. I got each of the Beatles to send me photographs that meant something to them.
By the late 60s, Richard Hamilton had become more than just a successful artist. He was part of the pop culture in his own right, and there was fresh interest in his famous picture of 1956.
Can I talk about your involvement with photography now? Photographs are used a great deal in your work.
Well, in looking at the world in 1956, we realized, I realized that a good deal of what we saw was not directly experienced. It was experienced through magazines, through reproductions, through television, the cinema. So there was always a second-hand character in this.
I felt there was something artificial about painting something. If it's essentially photographic, then it ought to be photographic and not a painted simulation, because that was art. But I was using things that came out of the magazines, And when you're using this technique of scissors, cutting things out, if it fits, you're lucky. If it doesn't fit, you've got to find something else. The scale is what you're given. You can't change it.
Today in his studio, Richard grapples with the same problems, but he's turned to computers for the solution. It's been a long search for perfection.
One of the things I love in my life is the possibility of moving towards a perfect system. The computer offers this infinite perfectibility, which is a kind of magic to me. What is beautiful about computers, to my mind, is the relationship you feel with the people who've created it. It's like looking at Mozart, to see somebody who is capable of developing something so beautiful, so perfect, so useful.
He taught himself to write his own programs in the 70s and started to use computers in his art.
This is an interesting entry. It was done in 1963, and it's called 5 Tires Abandoned. The drawing was abandoned because it was a very complex perspective of 5 tires that I was unable to complete by normal perspective means. But I returned to it in 1970, I think it was, using a computer to produce a project called 5 Tires Remolded.
In 1987, Richard Hamilton took part in a BBC programme that introduced him to powerful new graphics computers. At that stage, he needed an assistant to handle the machine.
I went and worked at Newbury, where they had all this equipment, and I found it absolutely fascinating.
I mean, there's no reason why I shouldn't say, look, why don't we...
But what, does that mean going over all that work again?
No.
So I realized that photography could be used in a quite different way than anything I'd anticipated before, because it then became something that you could use in a very free way.
Now Richard has mastered the operation of all the equipment for himself. The first picture he made in this new electronic studio was commissioned by QED. We asked him to create a 1990s version of his famous collage of 1956. It all starts with a picture postcard.
I found this marvelous shot of a room in Valencia, the hotel. It's a beautiful space, and it hasn't got so much in it that it doesn't make a good starting point. And it's got a window, and the window is very important, I think. You've got to be able to put something outside.
The first step is to capture the image using a scanner that analyzes it and turns it into computer code.
It looks a little cramped at the moment, and I haven't got much room to put anything. So I'll see if I can make a bit of space and move something into it. So I'll just roughly mark out the wall. And then if I reverse the stencil, it'll leave me with an opening there that I can fill with any color I want. Good distemper. It looks as though I'm taking away the room that I originally thought of might be a starting point. And the reason that I liked it in the first place was that it had a rather clean, simple geometry. And I'm inclining now to the idea that why not start to make a schematic room, but I can base my schematic room on this.
The computer lets him keep what he likes and reject the clutter. With the machine, he can draw the perspective lines and quickly get back to a clean space in which to place his symbols of the 90s.
That image starts with the same premise, that you can make a list and look at that list in comparison with the 90s and say, what represents man, what represents woman, and what represents food in this time, what the difference is. There was a very famous image of the 60s which used the characters L-O-V-E, and it typifies the whole of the hippie
60s era. Some friends of mine made a 1990 version of this, which used the characters AIDS. So I propose to put that as one of my pictures on the wall. AIDS, one of the aspects of the 90s which I think is pressing upon us more than any other. I think that will look rather handsome, if disturbing. Flicking through this magazine, I found what seemed to me to be a perfect symbol for our present times, which is a female muscle man. And one of the stars of this world is Bernie Price. So I brought her up from the scanner and made a cutout, made a stencil, which enables me to use her in this form. There she is. And I can adjust the size by using this large mouse, which is called a rat. And it's a matter of deciding where she might best be standing. But this is a rather good dominant position because she's right on the center of vision. It's a marvelous pose, and I think that she should be very central to the image in the way that my muscle man was central to the image in the first place. It's beginning to add up to something, but now I have to think about her partner. We need an Adam to go with our Eve, and I think I know where to find him.
766.
The commodities dealer, he is the symbol of our time, I think. The man who makes these computer exchanges of money, just figures in a computer, but millions of dollars, our whole fate really is dependent upon what happens inside this strange world of exchange.
Richard's camera doesn't use film. It captures the image on a computer disk. Back home, he can instantly transfer all his photos to the machine.
And then I'll switch on the camera. This is one which I might use. The main reason I like it is that it's the right sort of angle. I can see that I can fit it into the perspective.
In the final picture, the image is turned around to fit the frame.
So let's see how he looks as a cleaned up paste up. Then I'll have to fit him in the corner here somehow. I think he's beginning to look reasonably convincing in the perspective. Ready for a good one. Got it.
Instead of cinema in the 50s, Richard now gives pride of place to the TV set.
I've flipped it so it's reversed over laterally, left to right. It's going to need a little pulling around to make it fit the perspective, but it has some potential. Thought we would need a representation of history, and this little toy which I bought might be a suitably appropriate representation of past history. And when I put her on here to photograph her, it seemed like a good idea to put her on a pedestal. And I'm sure she's going to look very good isolated and on a bust in my room. We can then let the computer make an automatic stencil. So Maggie is now available to be put anywhere we like in the room. And what I'm proposing to do is to put her on a pedestal, like a Greek bust, for example. I can't remember when I last went to the cinema. I don't feel that I'm deprived of the cinematic experience because I have a miniature version of it on my television screen. I think Lawnmower Man will be very useful on the TV screen to suggest what I'm trying to put across.
Wow, it's my hands! Look at this! Oh my God!
This virtual reality game is something which is very much part of our time. It's just at the beginning of a great new period, I think, of computer technology. And I think there's probably going to be a particular frame that I can use to put on my television screen, which will have exactly the right quality. It's an extraordinary feeling and quite unlike any feeling that a painter has ever had, I think, to be able to stretch and pull his image around like this and fit it into a new perspective. I think that's looking reasonably like an image on the TV screen. It's not accurate perspective, but it's got something of the right feeling. The irritating thing is that it's taking far longer than using traditional methods. And it's only because this particular electronic image processing machine allows the possibility of making all these refinements. You can't make these refinements with scissors and paste. But the fact that it's possible means that one is tempted to try and do it.
The computer itself has to be part of any picture of the 90s. Richard has scanned in a printed circuit board. He's chosen it for his wallpaper.
And that is now in a manageable form. I can do more or less what I like with it. Moving it around, changing the scale. But more importantly, I can begin to use it for 3D. That is to say, put it in perspective. And it's quite nice to see it like this. It's like living inside a computer if your whole room is papered with circuit boards. We're surrounded by circuit boards. You can't move without circuit boards of one kind or another.
Having papered the walls, next come the windows.
I've made a rough mask, and I can use that stencil to open up the space and see what it looks like. I should be able to spray an opening which will just give me some idea about what the window could be if the light came from that side. There's an existing window which I have, which I could use here.
Richard's next choice is what to see outside.
If we look through the window, we can see a nice landscape, but actually what is coming over the horizon are people in Africa. So one is more conscious of those as being outside our nice little well-conditioned space. The thing that I would most like to be in the hand of Bernie is a lollipop, lady's lollipop, which will say, "Stop children."
The 50s tin of ham becomes fish fingers and a microwave. And the new picture is complete. The technology and appearance capture the look and feel of the 90s, just as the original picture captured the 50s. And as a reminder of history, the old picture goes onto the wall of the new. Finally, Richard runs off 5,000 copies on a colour laser printer, controlling the colour and lightness of each one by computer.
5,000 is about the maximum that anyone would be prepared to sit around and see coming out of this machine without going out of their minds. But I think it's a more democratic state of affairs. I like this democratization of art in that it's not just available to people who can walk into a gallery and buy something because they have the amount of money that's required for this rare item. But
that things should be that easy, but they should have a quality which gives them an authenticity.
Oh my God. That's fantastic. I really didn't know what to expect. I never saw myself as a lollipop lady, though, I have to say.
In the beginning, when we were winning,
it will certainly serve as a very potent reminder of all the things that concerned us at this particular moment. I'd certainly hang it on the walls of the Tate Gallery, and if I had one, I'd hang it at home.
Richard Hamilton is a very well-known artist and was in fact an old boy of the school some 60 years ago, and he's been kind enough to present the school with a copy of his new collage. This is what Richard Hamilton sees as life in the 1990s. And I wonder, what do you think of that piece of work?
Well, I have seen a lady holding the stop sign, but not like that.
She's not really a woman. She's like half man, half woman.
Well, if a man's got to be strong, why can't a lady be like a man? So, actually, I think it looks good.
A lot of people have got AIDS now, but it's quite sad because they can't get cured and they die of it, and it's not really their fault. I don't like the window showing all the refugees because I think everybody should get a fair share of food and water and everything.
This picture makes me feel, well, half happy and half sad.
Richard Hamilton signed these 5,000 prints for QED viewers. If you'd like one, send just your name and address to QED Print, PO Box 7, London W3 6XJ. Unfortunately, we can't acknowledge your requests, and if we get more applications than there are prints, we'll hold a draw on Friday, May the 7th.
Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Blackgate High School, to an evening of fashion, food and musical entertainment. As you will see from your programme, we will be starting with the fashion show, and then we will run through the following events without any further announcements. Could I just point out that in the interval, you will have no need to move from your seats, as the food will be served and the drinks will be served at the table.
Emma and Rhian are modelling a selection from Tabby Gold's Smart Look range. Emma is wearing a white sleeveless blouse, teamed with a pair of black. Thank you, girls. Now, what I'm going to do here is select the lovely fabrics and colours in this selection of casual and evening wear speak for itself as we watch the girls model outfits from the Austin Boutique. We've got some younger members of our school here, and they're looking absolutely delightful. The final 4 outfits in this range will be wedding outfits for a grand finale. I think we have about go almost anywhere he goes. I like a hard stare. That's really good.
What?
Thank you. They're absolutely gorgeous. That's lovely, girls. Thank you. I think you agree with this very wide range of outfit. I'll give us a twirl and a smile this time, girls. Smart girls dressed for an evening out. Perhaps going visiting. Are really stunning, especially the green with that extravagant gold embroidery of the other outfits. Again, the wealth of extravagant detail in front of there really is quite stunning. 19th, we've got the first of our wedding outfits here. Yes. I think if you could express your appreciation by clapping. And a lovely, absolutely beautiful set of clothing for a wedding. Beautiful. Let's just have a look at the fabric on there. Auntie was modelling another lovely wedding outfit, pink and gold. There's green detail in that hem and edging, that wonderful embroidery. Really is a wedding dress with a difference. This is absolutely stunning. Lots of gold. A lovely orange edging.
was going in, I thought maybe. She does look a bit pretty.
Isn't she nice? She's more colour, she's nice freckles.
Good one.
Scissors right now. Does this have to be directed, Chris?
Turn around, Laura.
No, no, so down.
Well, he knows it from Christmas.
Don't take any more from
Laura, listen up, Laura. Smile. Hands down. Hands full. Wash your hands.
cup of tea.
He has armed to roasted.
Here all day. He comes from
Roasted.
That's what they wear over there.
Terence.
Laura.
No.
You're very cool, you're natural. Well, you make your first meeting another confirmation. What next year?
Up over there, they make it next to Sunday, so they wouldn't have as many as the 1 year. So we have 1 year, and we've got shopping, and we're like 38, 37.
You're going to foot out the back?
It might be too wet, Daddy.
Yep, it's not really gas.
Can't you see her? No, she can do that today.
The foot of you will have a one keep dress. Back tomorrow. You stop credit, Paddy.
Beautiful. It's good to be pinpoint. Okay, that's lovely in the garden. It's lovely. And the jam. It's jam. Well, but look out yourself. It's not open up.
You two out of the way. Come on, out of the way. Get out of the way.
Here, smile at us, Laura. Oh, Laura, you're lovely.
Terence, move out of the way, man.
Just let them dry.
Good. Now look. Right.
Bye.
just so kind and good and gentle and...
Very pleasant entirely for me listening, and what surprises me and thrills me is the amount of really good teaching that's going on here. And congratulations to our teachers. There's a lot of good work and it's lovely to hear. Now, in this performance, I'm bound to look for something with a limit. It's in 6/8, it's Dorothy Park, whom I knew, and I enjoyed the music for many years. So, that's a lovely collection of songs from my writing words. Now, when I looked down my list and I saw 4, 5, 6, 7 all vanished, I thought, goodness, are they scared of me or something? And I decided to leave when people started coming back. Now, on just a practical point, on the choice of pitches for young voices, an adjudicator would have no problem at all if the candidate wants to put a song down because it's too high. That is obvious. But from the point of view of, and I do a lot of accompanying, the accompanist, please do not come into a competition and just walk up and say, play that and beat that. Because it's always a joke. You can play in one key, suddenly you have to change it in public. There are people who do that with ease. Some of us can do it, but not so much with ease. And we lose a lot of weight when suddenly flung into the process of having to do perspiration drops off one. Because everybody's looking around and saying, I think you should do better than that. So please don't do that. Now, as regards those songs, they are not folk songs, and they very, very much need an accompaniment. Now, it's up to an awful lot of a young singer to carry a song like that and keep it in tune. And one of our candidates did very well. But on that, I would say, please, please, please produce an accompaniment, or an accompanist if you're not sure. Okay, with that said, again, my thanks to all performers. So, as I say, the standard was fairly high, and it's fairly uniform. So I've given highly commended performances to each of the following: 3, 8, 14, 22, 24. They have all highly commended performances. Well done. I'm giving the third prize to that candidate who sang without a piano. It needs considerable calm to do so. And I would have much preferred a performance with the piano, but that was a risk she took. And I've given her third prize at 87 marks. The candidate I've given 88 marks to a lovely performance, candidate number 15. Candidates are, I'm sorry, I can't read names, I just give out a number. And for what I thought was a beautifully convincing performance, I'm delighted to give 89 to candidate number 13. Could I have numbers, number 21, please, for third prize? Number 15 and second prize, please. And number 13, first prize.
I feel a surge of deep satisfaction. What was the kick
A strike is no mistake when I return from daily strife. Half and white.
Congratulations,
Yes, yes.
Three, four, five, six, seven, orange. Which one? Oops, which one?
No.
Who wants white lemonade?
Me.
1, 2. Calvin, what do you want?
Mommy.
Yes. Your bum. Right. Okay, then champagne, sir?
I want that.
Fancy glasses, right, go on. And who else has to have?
I would make
plastic
drink.
cups?
I want orange.
Do you want a fancy glass? Okay. Hey, do you want to use one to orange? Special glass?
Laura, feed it to the
Kathleen, do you want orange? Do you want
Pass me.
Hey, Trotsky.
Could you pass me?
There's always one. There's always one.
What?
I'll just who has one lemonade? Whoever wants lemonade.
I want the brown one.
Do you want orange? Yeah, you want orange.
Which one's the last one? You me a
Right, Joe, have to swap. Where will we all go to sit there? What song would we like to sing?
Farms in the swish, clap your hands in the swish dance.
I don't know it. No, I don't know.
Move like caged tigers, making a constant mess. The way we walk, the way we talk, the way we stalk, the way we kiss. We slip through the trees while everyone sleeps. Get a big and sick and wide and bright. We bite and scratch and scream all night. Let's go and throw all the songs we know into the sea. You and me. Thank you.